10 years of marriage ended not with a bang, but with the click of a strange bracelet in my husband's pocket and the smell of bitter almonds rising from the pomegranate juice he poured, I thought Jason was just a terrible cheater. But when he fell to the floor, foaming at the mouth after drinking the wrong glass, I realized I was living inside a death match where I was nothing more than a disposable pawn. My name is Clara, and as a senior architect at Apex Skyline, I make a living ensuring structures do not collapse under pressure. Yet, as I stepped into our Chicago penthouse that evening, shaking off the sleet from a grueling business trip, I felt a fracture in the foundation of my own life that no blueprint could fix. The air inside was unnaturally cold, a sterile chill that the heating system could not touch. Jason was waiting for me. My husband of 10 years stood by the dining table, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. He wore a crisp dress shirt and that perfect, rehearsed smile he usually reserved for his clients. It was a scene from a romance novel, but it felt wrong. We had not shared a candlelit dinner in 6 months, not since the silence started growing between us like weeds in a cracked sidewalk. "Welcome home, darling," he said, his voice smooth but tight. He reached for the crystal pitcher. He was pouring pomegranate juice, my absolute favorite antioxidant blend. I watched the dark red liquid swirl into the glass. As an architect, I am trained to notice the slightest instability, the microscopic sway of a skyscraper in the wind. That was how I saw his hand tremble. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible vibration as the juice rose to the rim. Jason was nervous. Why would a husband be terrified to pour his wife a drink? "I forgot the napkins," he muttered, turning abruptly toward the kitchen. His suit jacket was draped over the back of his chair. I moved on impulse. I needed to check my email, and I thought his phone might be in his pocket since mine was buried in my luggage. My hand slid into the silk lining of his jacket. Instead of a phone, my fingertips grazed something cold and metallic. I pulled it out just enough to see the glint of gold under the chandelier. It was a Cartier bracelet, heavy and expensive. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw the engraving. The letter B was etched into the gold in an elegant script. "My name is Clara." There is no B in Clara. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. He was having an affair. This dinner was an apology, or perhaps a distraction. I shoved the bracelet back into his pocket as I heard his footsteps returning, my blood boiling with humiliation. I needed to calm down. I reached for the glass of pomegranate juice he had just poured, intending to take a long sip to steady my nerves. I brought the crystal to my lips. Then I stopped. The scent that wafted up was not the sharp, tart tang of pomegranate. It was sweet, cloying, and unmistakably chemical. It smelled like bitter almonds. My stomach dropped. I read enough true crime novels to know that scent. It was the hallmark of cyanide or industrial pesticides. The trembling hand, the sudden dinner, the bracelet. The picture rearranged itself in my mind in a terrifying second. He was not just cheating on me. He was cleaning up loose ends. Jason walked back into the room, a cloth napkin in hand. His eyes did not meet mine. They were fixed on the glass in my hand. "Drink up," he said, his voice strained. "You look exhausted. Clara, it will make you feel better." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But I froze. If I accused him now, he might get violent. I needed to be smarter. I needed to change the variables. My hand feigned a spasm, and I knocked my silver fork off the table. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. "Oh, clumsy me," I said, my voice trembling for real this time. Jason sighed, the mask of the perfect husband slipping for a fraction of a second. "Let me get that for you," he said, as he bent down, disappearing beneath the edge of the table to retrieve the fork. I moved with the precision of a surgeon. I reached out and switched our glasses. The liquid levels were identical. The color was the same deep crimson. Jason resurfaced, placing the fork back on the table. He looked at me, then at the glass sitting in front of him. He seemed agitated, sweat beading on his upper lip. He needed to break the tension. He needed to normalize the moment. He picked up the glass that used to be mine. "To your return," he said, a little too loudly. I held my breath, my fingers gripping the stem of my own harmless glass so hard my knuckles turned white. I watched him lift the poison to his lips. He tipped his head back and drank it down in one large, nervous gulp, completely unaware that the architecture of his murder plot had just been reversed. The silence following his toast lasted less than 60 seconds. Jason cleared his throat, a small, irritating sound that quickly escalated into a wet, violent hacking. His hand flew to his neck, fingers digging into the skin as if he were trying to tear away an invisible noose. The redness started at his collar and flooded his face, turning the handsome features I had loved for 10 years into a mask of pure agony. Then the color drained away just as fast, leaving him a terrifying shade of gray. Jason stood up, knocking the heavy oak table with his thighs. The china plates slid and shattered against the floor, sending roasted vegetables and shards of porcelain flying across the room. He did not just fall. He crumbled. His body hit the hardwood with a sickening thud, and almost immediately, the convulsions began. His back arched off the floor in a grotesque bow. White foam mixed with the crimson juice bubbled at the corners of his mouth, but it was his eyes that haunted me. They rolled back, then snapped forward, locking onto mine with a look of absolute terror and profound confusion. He was staring at me, begging for help, completely unaware that he was the architect of his own destruction. I was already on the phone with emergency services, shouting our address into the receiver while I knelt beside him. My hands moved automatically to clear his airway, acting on muscle memory from a first aid course I took years ago. It was a form of psychological torture I could not describe. I was trying to save the life of the man who had, mere moments ago, tried to end mine. I pumped his chest, counting the compressions, feeling his ribs flex under my weight, while a cold voice in the back of my head whispered that I should let him die. The apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, was suddenly violated by the screech of sirens. Blue and red lights flashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, slicing through the darkness. When the paramedics burst in, I was shoved aside, the room filled with the crackle of radios and the heavy tread of boots. While they worked on Jason, stabbing him with needles and shouting medical jargon, I turned to the first police officer I saw. I handed him 2 Ziploc bags I had grabbed from the kitchen drawer. One contained the Cartier bracelet, the other contained the 2 glasses, which I had carefully picked up by the stems. "Do not let anyone touch these," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "And smell the glass he drank from. It smells like bitter almonds." Hours later, the hospital waiting room felt like a purgatory of fluorescent lights and vending machines. A doctor emerged, looking grim. He told me Jason was in critical condition. He had ingested a concentrated industrial pesticide, a compound that was odorless to most people but carried a faint, sweet scent if the concentration was high enough. It caused rapid respiratory failure. Detective Vance approached me then. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes that seemed to dissect me. He did not offer comfort. He offered questions. "You told the responding officer you switched the glasses," Vance said, leaning against the wall. "Why would you do that, Mrs. Miller? Did you know the poison was there?" I felt the trap closing around me. To an outsider, it looked like I had poisoned my husband. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photo I had taken of the bracelet before handing it over. "I found a bracelet in his pocket tonight," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It has the initial B engraved on it. My name is Clara." I knew he was cheating. When he poured my drink, his hand was shaking, and then I smelled it. I switched them because I was terrified. Vance looked at the photo, then back at me. A uniformed officer walked up to him and whispered something, handing him a tablet. Vance looked at the screen and his expression shifted. "The lab just confirmed it," Vance said, his tone less accusatory but still wary. "The residue in the glass your husband drank from contained a lethal dose of the pesticide. The other glass, the one you were originally served, was clean." I leaned back in the plastic chair, the adrenaline finally crashing. The reality washed over me. Only one glass was poisoned. If I had not switched the glasses, if I had trusted my husband for 1 second longer, I would be the one convulsing on a gurney right now. I was alive only because I had been quicker, colder, and more suspicious than he ever imagined I could be. I could not sit in that antiseptic waiting room watching the heart monitor beep for a man who likely tried to murder me. I needed answers that Detective Vance was too slow to find. I drove back to the penthouse. The police had left, but the energy of the trauma still hung heavy in the air, smelling of stale fear and cleaning chemicals. I went straight to Jason's study. I am an architect, and I know how space works. I know that the depth of the built-in mahogany bookshelves on the east wall did not match the exterior dimensions of the room. There was dead space. I ran my hands along the molding until I felt a slight indentation. A click echoed, and a false panel popped open. Inside, I found a stack of financial documents that painted a picture of a stranger. There were statements for credit cards I had never seen, all maxed out on jewelry, 5-star dinners, and designer handbags. But the most damning receipt was a recurring monthly payment for a luxury apartment at a complex called Riverdale Heights. Underneath the papers was a photograph. It was a Polaroid of Jason, looking younger and more alive than he had in years, with his arm wrapped tight around a woman's waist. She was a stunning blonde with sharp features. I turned the photo over. In looping cursive, it read, "Love you always." Bella. My stomach twisted. I knew her. Bella was a junior associate at Zenith Structures, my firm's biggest rival. She was 24, ambitious, and ruthless. I grabbed my keys and drove to the suburbs. Riverdale Heights was a gated community that smelled of new money and secrecy. I pulled my hair back, put on a baseball cap, and grabbed a clipboard from my back seat to pose as a late-night courier with a delivery issue. The building manager was a weary man who looked like he had seen everything. I showed him the picture of Jason. "Yeah, that is Mr. Stone," he said, squinting at the photo. "He comes here on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Mr. Stone. My husband had invented a whole new identity. I asked if things had been peaceful lately. The manager scoffed. "Peaceful hardly," he said. "The walls are thin. They have been screaming at each other for weeks. Real nasty stuff. Talking about how they were tired of waiting. Talking about freedom and money. Lots of money. Specifically, something about an insurance payout." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening snap. I sat in my car in the parking lot and logged into our shared cloud drive, digging into the archive folder Jason thought I never checked. There it was. A life insurance policy taken out on me exactly 3 months ago. The coverage was for $2 million. The sole beneficiary was Jason Miller. The narrative seemed complete. Jason had an expensive mistress and a mountain of debt. He needed a way out, and I was worth more dead than alive. He planned to kill me with the pesticide, claim the $2 million, and start a new life with Bella as Mr. Stone. It was a classic, brutal cliché. But as I drove back toward the city, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached, one detail nagged at me. It was a structural flaw in my theory that I could not ignore. I replayed the dinner in my mind. I saw Jason pick up the glass I had swapped. He did not sniff it. He did not hesitate. He did not check which glass was which. He drank it with a desperate, confident finality. If he was the one who put the poison in the glass, why was he so careless when he drank "a murderer knows where the weapon is"? Jason drank like a man who believed he was completely safe. I waited outside the glass doors of Zenith Structures until I saw her. Bella looked even younger in person. Her blonde hair pulled back in a high ponytail that swished with every confident step she took. She had the kind of innocent face that let her get away with murder, but her eyes were cold, calculating chips of blue ice. I followed her to a nearby coffee shop and slid into the booth opposite her before she could even take a sip of her iced latte. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I pulled the heavy Cartier bracelet from my bag and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a dull clank against the faux marble surface. "I believe you lost this," I said, keeping my voice flat. Bella did not flinch. She did not look ashamed or frightened. Instead, a slow, arrogant smile spread across her glossy lips. She picked up the bracelet, turning it over in her manicured fingers as if admiring a trophy she had already won. "Finally," she said, her tone light and airy. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to find it. Jason is not exactly subtle, is he? Or maybe he just wanted you to find it. He has been dying to leave you for months. Clara, he tells me everything. How boring you are, how the spark is gone. He is just too polite to say it to your face." Her words were designed to hurt, sharp little needles aiming for my insecurities, but I was too numb to bleed. "Is he polite enough to poison me?" I asked, my gaze hardening. "Because that is what happened last night. He tried to kill me with industrial pesticide in my pomegranate juice." The smile vanished from Bella's face instantly. Her skin went pale, and for the first time, I saw genuine shock ripple through her features. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by confusion. "Poison," she whispered, her eyes widening. "You are lying. Jason is a coward. He cannot even work up the nerve to ask for a divorce. He would never have the guts to kill anyone. He is weak. Clara." That is why I had to force his hand. "Force his hand," I asked. "I went to your apartment yesterday afternoon," she confessed, leaning forward with a conspiratorial intensity. "I have a key. I waited for him to come home, but he was late. So I slipped the bracelet into his jacket pocket while it was hanging on the chair. I wanted you to find it. I wanted to blow your little marriage up so he would finally be mine." My mind raced. If she was in the apartment, she had access to the kitchen. She had access to the refrigerator. She could have taken the juice out, spiked it, and put it back. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Detective Vance. I answered, keeping my eyes locked on Bella. "Mrs. Miller," Vance said, his voice urgent. "We processed the juice bottle found in your refrigerator. We found a third set of fingerprints on it. Not yours. Not your husband's." I hung up and looked at Bella with renewed suspicion. "You were in my kitchen," I said. "You put the poison in the bottle. You wanted me dead so you could have him and the insurance money." Bella laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You are crazy. I was in your apartment at 3 in the afternoon. I left by 3:30. "That gave you plenty of time to tamper with the drink," I said. "No, it does not," she snapped. She pulled out her phone and aggressively tapped the screen. "Look, I am an influencer on the side. I was doing a live unboxing video for a sponsor from 4 o'clock until 6. Thousands of people saw me. I was across town at my studio. I looked at the timestamp on the video she shoved in my face. It was authentic. She was live on camera, miles away, at the exact time Jason bought the juice from the gourmet market and brought it home. Jason bought the juice at 5:30. If Bella was on a live stream from 4 to 6, she could not have touched that bottle after Jason bought it. The logic crumbled in my hands. Jason drank the juice, so he did not know it was poisoned. Bella had a rock-solid alibi for the time the juice was purchased and brought into the house. We were staring at a dead end. If it was not the husband who drank it, and it was not the mistress who wanted him, then who put the poison in the bottle? The hospital room smelled of iodine and stale despair. Jason was awake, but he was not back. The neurotoxin had short-circuited his nervous system, leaving him trapped inside his own body. He lay there, a statue in a hospital gown, his eyes darting frantically from side to side like a trapped animal. His fingers twitched against the coarse white sheets, a weak, rhythmic tapping that signaled he was still in there somewhere. I stood over him, looking down at the man I had shared a bed with for a decade. I felt no pity. I felt a cold, heavy revulsion mixed with a burning curiosity. I did not want to hold his hand. I wanted to shake him until the truth fell out of his paralyzed throat. Detective Vance met me in the corridor, looking more tired than he had the night before. He held up a plastic evidence bag containing a cheap burner phone found in the glove compartment of Jason's car. "We cracked the call log," Vance said, his voice low and gravelly. He was not just talking to his girlfriend. He made 17 calls in the last 48 hours to a number registered to a man named Rocco. "We know Rocco. He is a loan shark who runs the underground gambling operations in the meatpacking district. Your husband was not just cheating. Mrs. Miller. He was drowning. I left the hospital and drove straight to the law firm that handled Jason's personal accounts. I used my power of attorney and a significant amount of leverage to bully his junior partner into opening the books. The financial records were a bloodbath. Jason had been embezzling funds from his own company, siphoning off hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay a debt that kept growing. He was not building a nest egg for a romantic getaway with Bella. He was frantically shoveling cash into a black hole to keep his legs from being broken. He was a desperate man, cornered by wolves. As I walked out of the office into the biting wind, my phone pinged. It was an email from an encrypted anonymous sender. There was no subject line. The message was short and chilling. "Your husband did not intend to kill you. He is just a puppet." The words stopped me cold on the sidewalk. If Jason was just a puppet, then who was pulling the strings? The poisoning was not a simple crime of passion. It was something darker, a complex arrangement I was only just beginning to see. I needed to verify everything. I drove back to the penthouse, the silence of the apartment feeling more oppressive than ever. Jason thought he was the tech-savvy one in our relationship, but I was the architect who designed the security specifications for the building. He believed he had disabled the interior cameras. He did not know about the redundant backup system I had installed on a separate server. I sat in the dark living room, the blue light of the laptop illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I pulled up the footage from the previous afternoon. I watched Bella let herself in with a key I did not know she had. I saw the arrogant strut I had witnessed at the coffee shop. She walked over to the dining chair where Jason's jacket hung. With a smirk, she slipped the gold Cartier bracelet into his pocket. It was a calculated move to destroy my marriage, exactly as she had claimed. But then I watched her next moves with obsessive focus. She walked around the room, checking her makeup in the mirror, touching a vase, looking at her phone. She never went near the kitchen. She never opened the refrigerator. She never touched the pomegranate juice. I rewound the footage and watched it 3 times. Bella was a homewrecker, but she was not a killer. The footage proved she had no opportunity to poison the bottle. My theory was dead. If Bella did not do it, and Jason drank the juice without hesitation, I was left with a terrifying void where the answer should be. I sat frozen in front of the laptop screen, my eyes burning as I watched the digital ghost of my husband move through our living room. The timestamp read 5:45 in the evening. Jason had just come home. He did not look like a cold-blooded killer. He looked like a man on the verge of a breakdown. He paced around the dining table, running his hands through his hair, checking his phone every 10 seconds. He was vibrating with anxiety. Then, I saw him open his briefcase. He pulled out a small glass vial. My heart stopped as I watched him unscrew the cap and tip the contents into the glass of pomegranate juice sitting at my place setting. There it was, the smoking gun. I had visual proof that Jason had spiked my drink. Rage flared hot and bright in my chest, but it was extinguished a second later by sheer confusion. Jason reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a second vial. It was different from the first one, larger and darker. He hesitated for a moment, his hand trembling violently, before he poured the entire contents of this second vial into his own glass. I rewound the video and watched it again. He had drugged both of us. Was this a murder-suicide? Was he planning to take us both out in some twisted Romeo and Juliet ending? I slammed the laptop shut and drove to the precinct, demanding to see Detective Vance immediately. I showed him the footage, pointing a shaking finger at the screen as Jason poured the liquids. Vance called in the toxicology team to cross-reference the footage with the residue found in the vials Jason had discarded in the kitchen trash, which the police had recovered earlier. An hour later, Vance came back into the interrogation room. He looked disturbed. He placed a file on the table and sat down heavily opposite me. "We identified the substances, Mrs. Miller," Vance said. "The vial Jason put in your glass contained a massive dose of benzodiazepines. It is a sedative, strong enough to knock a horse out for 24 hours, but typically not lethal unless mixed with alcohol." I stared at him, trying to process the words. He wanted to put me to sleep. Vance nodded and tapped the screen. But the second vial, the one he put in his own glass, that was the industrial pesticide. Pure, concentrated poison. The room seemed to tilt. Jason had not tried to murder me. He had planned to commit suicide. He wanted to knock me out so I would not wake up and stop him, or perhaps so I would not have to witness the horror of him dying. He intended to die alone at that table while I slept peacefully in my chair. But I had switched the glasses. A wave of nausea hit me. If I switched the glasses, then Jason drank from the glass that was originally mine. That meant he drank the sedative. But I saw him die. I saw him foam at the mouth and seize. That was not a reaction to sleeping pills. I looked at Vance, my voice barely a whisper. If he drank the sedative, why is he dead? Why did he have the symptoms of nerve agent poisoning? Vance opened the folder to the final page. "This is where it gets complicated," he said. "We ran a full-spectrum analysis on the residue in the glass Jason actually drank. The one you switched. We found the benzodiazepines," he added. "Yes. But we also found high concentrations of the industrial pesticide." I shook my head. "That is impossible." He put the poison in the other glass, the one I was holding. Vance looked at me with a grim expression. "We tested the juice remaining in the bottle. Clara, the poison was not just in the glass. It was in the bottle. The entire bottle of pomegranate juice was laced with the pesticide before Jason even brought it home." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Jason was a victim. He had planned a tragic, noble exit to save me from his debts, intending to drift off into oblivion while I slept. But he never got the chance to execute his plan. Someone else had beaten him to it. There were two poisoners in this story. Jason had added sleeping pills to a drink that was already lethal. He was a dead man the moment he bought that bottle from the store. 3 days after the incident, the paralysis in Jason's throat finally receded enough for him to speak. His voice was a ruined, raspy whisper that sounded like dry leaves dragging across concrete. I sat by his bedside with the Detective Vance standing guard by the door. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream at him for the betrayal, for the bracelet, for the terrifying game of Russian roulette he had played with our lives. But as he began to talk, the anger in my chest curdled into a sickening mixture of pity and horror. Jason wept. It was not the dignified, silent weeping of a martyr, but the ugly, snot-nosed sobbing of a broken man. He confessed to everything, but the story he told was not the sordid tale of greed I had constructed. Yes, he had slept with Bella. He admitted it with his eyes closed, unable to look at me. But he swore he had planned to break up with her that very night. She was a distraction, a drug he used to numb the panic that had been eating him alive for months. The money, the embezzlement, the debt to the loan shark named Rocco. None of it was for gambling or high-end lifestyle choices. It was for Toby. "Who is Toby?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Toby is my son," Jason whispered. The room went dead silent. Jason explained that 15 years ago, before he met me. He had a brief relationship with his first love. She got pregnant but never told him until the boy was 3. She died 2 years ago, leaving Toby alone. Jason had been secretly paying for everything since then, keeping the boy hidden from me because he was terrified I would leave him if I knew he came with a secret family. But then Toby got sick. He has acute leukemia. He is 14 years old and dying. The treatments drained Jason's savings. Then he started stealing from the firm. When that was not enough, he went to Rocco. But the debt spiraled out of control, and Rocco began threatening to hurt Toby if Jason did not pay up. I listened, stunned, as the monster I thought I knew transformed into a desperate, terrified father. "The insurance policy," Jason choked out. "The one you found. You thought it was on you. It was a joint policy. Clara, it pays out $2 million if either of us dies by accident or homicide." He looked at me, his eyes red and pleading. "I did not want to kill you, Clara. I would never hurt you. The sleeping pills were to knock you out. I needed you to be asleep so you would not stop me. I was going to stage a break-in. I was going to let Rocco's enforcer in, or make it look like a robbery gone wrong. I was going to die that night. Clara, I was going to sacrifice myself so the insurance money would pay out to you." He had written a letter, hidden in his safe deposit box, explaining everything and begging me to use the $2 million to save Toby and pay off the debts. He was worth more dead than alive, and he was willing to trade his life for his son's future. But there was one variable he had not accounted for. He did not know the pomegranate juice was poisoned. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He had planned a noble, twisted suicide to save a child I never knew existed. He poured the sleeping pills into my glass to protect me from the trauma of witnessing his death. But some unknown third party had poisoned the bottle before it even entered our house. If I had not switched the glasses, I would have slept through the night while Jason died of pesticide poisoning, thinking his plan had worked. Instead, I switched them. I gave him the sleeping pills, which saved him from a lethal dose of the poison he unknowingly poured for himself. But the mixture still nearly killed him. I looked at this man, this liar, this cheater, this desperate father. He was a wreck of human failures and tragic intentions. He had destroyed our marriage and nearly killed us both, all to save a boy who was fighting for his life in a different hospital across the city. The complexity of it was suffocating. He was a villain and a hero in the same breath, and I did not know how to breathe in the space between the two. The question of who poisoned the pomegranate juice became the final, maddening thread in the tapestry of our destruction. Jason had confessed to the sleeping pills, and Bella had confessed to the bracelet, but neither of them had touched the bottle with industrial pesticide. The answer, when it finally arrived, was so banal and terrifyingly random that it made the personal drama of our lives feel small and ridiculous. Detective Vance called me into his office 4 days after the incident. He looked exhausted, his desk covered in reports from the FDA and the local health department. He told me they had traced the lot number on the bottle of juice Jason had purchased from the gourmet market. It was not a targeted attack. It was not a crime of passion. It was a statistical anomaly. A disgruntled employee at the bottling plant in Ohio, a man who had been fired after 20 years of service, had decided to take his revenge on the corporation. On his last day, he had injected a concentrated dose of industrial insecticide into 12 random bottles moving down the assembly line before sealing them. 12 bottles out of 50,000. They were shipped all over the Midwest. 2 people in Detroit had been hospitalized. A woman in Cleveland had died. And Jason, in his desperate bid to stage a suicide to save his son, had walked into a market in Chicago and picked up one of those 12 bottles. I sat in the precinct chair, feeling the room spin. It was a cosmic joke. Jason had planned a meticulous, heartbreaking exit strategy involving sleeping pills and a staged robbery. But fate had intervened with a needle in a factory hundreds of miles away. If I had not switched the glasses, I would have drunk Jason's sleeping draught mixed with the factory's poison. I would have fallen asleep and never woken up, my body shutting down under a chemical assault that had nothing to do with my husband's betrayal and everything to do with a stranger's grudge. The realization of how close I had come to death made me shiver. Our lives were so fragile, suspended on a web of coincidences. The bracelet, the juice, the swap. One different choice, one different second. and the outcome would have been a funeral. With the truth out, the house of cards collapsed completely. Bella, the catalyst for so much of the pain, did not stick around to see the fallout. When news of Jason's embezzlement and his connection to Rocco hit the underground grapevine, the loan sharks started looking for collateral. Bella received a single visit from two men in leather jackets at her studio. I do not know what they said to her, but she scrubbed her social media accounts, broke her lease, and vanished from Chicago the next morning. She was a parasite who realized the host was finally dead. Jason was not so lucky. He survived the physical poisoning, but his life as he knew it was over. The district attorney was not interested in his sob story about a dying son. Embezzlement is a felony. Fraud is a felony. He was looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. He had lost his job, his reputation, and his freedom. He sat in a holding cell, a man who had tried to be a savior and ended up a criminal, stripping himself of everything to pay a debt that could no longer be paid. The irony was absolute. He had tried to die to provide for Toby, but by surviving, he had ensured he could provide nothing at all. I drove to the children's hospital on a Tuesday morning, the sky the color of a bruised plum. Finding Toby was not difficult once I had the name from Jason's confession. He was in room 412 of the oncology ward, a place where the silence was heavy enough to crush you. When I walked in, he was sleeping. He was 14 years old, but he looked much younger, his body wasted away by the disease that was eating his blood. He was pale, his skin translucent against the stark white sheets. But the moment I saw his face, I felt a physical jolt. He had Jason's nose. He had the exact same curve of the jawline. When he woke up, his eyes fluttered open, and they were Jason's eyes, brown and warm. He did not know who I was. I told him I was a friend of his Uncle Jason. The boy smiled, a weak, fragile thing that broke my heart. "Uncle Jason is the best," Toby whispered, his voice thin. "He always brings me the best comic books. He promised he would be here for my operation. Is he okay? He has not come this week." Toby did not know. He did not know that Uncle Jason was his father. He did not know his father was a criminal. He did not know that the man he idolized had almost killed himself and me to pay for the surgery that would save his life. I sat there listening to this innocent boy talk about the man who had betrayed me, and I felt a war raging inside my chest. I could walk away. I could divorce Jason, sell our assets, take my half of the money, and leave them both to their fate. It would be justice. It would be what they deserved. But looking at Toby, I realized that justice for Jason meant a death sentence for this child. Toby was innocent. He was a victim of biology and circumstance, just like I was a victim of Jason's lies. I looked at the machines beeping rhythmically beside his bed, counting down the moments he had left without the bone marrow transplant. I left the hospital and made a call to my real estate agent. I told her to list the penthouse immediately. I wanted a quick sale, cash only. Within 48 hours, we had an offer. It was $3,500,000. It was a fortune, enough to start a new life anywhere in the world. I took the money and I made 2 transfers. The first was to Jason's firm, Apex Skyline. I paid back every single cent he had embezzled, plus interest. It was not enough to erase the crime, but it was enough to downgrade the charges, enough to ensure he would spend 5 years in prison instead of 15. The second transfer was to the hospital. I paid for the transplant, the aftercare, and a trust fund to ensure Toby would have a future even if his father was behind bars. When I went to the county jail to tell Jason, he was sitting behind the glass partition, looking like a ghost. He wore a bright orange jumpsuit that clashed with his gray skin. When I told him what I had done, that the house was gone but his son would live, he broke. He put his head in his hands and sobbed, his shoulders shaking with a violence that drew stares from the guards. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, and whispered that he loved me, that he was sorry, that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I looked at him through the scratched glass. I felt the weight of 10 years of marriage, the memories of vacations and anniversaries, the dinner parties and the quiet mornings. I felt all of it, and then I felt it evaporate. There was no anger left. There was no hatred, but there was no love either. I looked at him not as my husband, but as a pathetic, broken man who had tried to do the right thing in the worst possible way. I did not do it for you, Jason, I said, my voice steady and cold. I did it because I am not you. I did it because a child should not have to die just because his father is a fool. I stood up and walked away while he was still crying, leaving him alone with his guilt and his gratitude, neither of which I wanted anymore. The surgery lasted 12 hours. I spent every single minute of it pacing the sterile hallway of the pediatric intensive care unit, drinking terrible coffee and watching the clock on the wall tick away the final moments of my old life. When the surgeon finally emerged, pulling off his cap and looking exhausted but triumphant, I did not rush forward to hug him. I just listened to the words. The transplant was successful. Toby was going to live. I walked to the large glass window looking into the recovery room. I saw the boy lying there, hooked up to tubes and monitors, his chest rising and falling with a steady, rhythmic grace. I did not go inside. I did not need to hold his hand or hear his gratitude. I had paid his debt, but I was not his mother, and I was certainly no longer his father's wife. I turned my back on the window and walked out of the hospital without looking back. My final stop was the Cook County Jail. The visiting room was loud and smelled of industrial cleaner and sweat. Jason sat on the other side of the thick plexiglass partition. He looked 10 years older than the man who had poured my juice just a week ago. His hair was shaved, and his eyes were hollow. I did not pick up the phone immediately. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. I pressed the signed divorce papers against the glass so he could see his name in my handwriting. I picked up the receiver. Jason picked up his. He did not say anything. He just looked at me with a mixture of shame and desperate hope. "Toby is going to make it," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. The surgery worked. Jason closed his eyes and let out a shuddering breath, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. "Thank you, Clara. Thank you. I do not deserve this. I do not deserve you." I cut him off. "Do not mistake this for forgiveness," I said. "I saved Toby because he is a human being who did not ask to be part of your mess. I did not do it because he is your son. As for you, Jason, you died in my heart the exact moment my fingers found that bracelet in your pocket. You are a stranger to me now." Jason nodded slowly. He understood. He had lost his wife, his career at Apex Skyline, his freedom, and his reputation. He would spend the next 5 years in a cage, but his son was alive. It was the only victory he had left, and it had cost him everything else. I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. I stood up, gathered my coat, and walked out of the facility. The heavy metal doors clanged shut behind me with a finality that felt like a gunshot. Outside, the Chicago winter was in full force. The wind whipped off the lake, biting and bitter. But for the first time in months, the cold did not bother me. It felt cleansing. I breathed it in deep, feeling it fill my lungs, scrubbing away the scent of bitter almonds and betrayal. I had left everything behind. I took no alimony. I asked for no settlement. I left the furniture, the art, and the memories in the penthouse that now belonged to someone else. I was 38 years old, and I was starting over with nothing but the clothes on my back and a clean conscience. I hailed a yellow taxi at the curb. "Where to?" Lady the driver asked. "O'Hare International Airport," I said. In my hand, I clutched a one-way ticket to Paris. It was the city where I had been accepted into a master's program 10 years ago, the dream I had foolishly abandoned to marry a man who promised me the world and gave me poison. I was going back to reclaim the life I should have lived. At the airport terminal, waiting for my flight to board, I sat at a small bar and ordered a glass of fresh orange juice. When the bartender set it down in front of me, bright and sunny in the crystal glass, I hesitated. The trauma was still there, a shadow in the back of my mind. I lifted the glass to my nose and inhaled deeply. I checked for the scent of almonds. I checked for the chemical sweetness of death. There was nothing but the sharp, tangy aroma of citrus. I smiled, a small, genuine curve of my lips. I tipped the glass back and drank it all, ready to board my flight and never look back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from, as I would love to hear from you and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.